Hello, fellow comic book worms. This is Naman. Welcome to my channel. Today I have a very special guest, Ernest Chan from DreamWorks TV. Otaku Young will be interviewing him, and if there are people in the chat room, I'll try to bring your question in and interrupt the conversation here and there. But mostly, we're gonna see if we could get something out of our guest today and see how this crossover thing will work today. So, Otaku Hyang, would you introduce our guest and then you take it?
Yeah. So we have a very special guest today. It's Ernest Chan. He's the animation director at for DreamWorks TV, and this is a little different from our typical format because normally we feature comic book artists and comic book collectors, but animation is so related to comic books. I mean, if you look at Japanese manga, for example, the progression there is a manga content, and if it gets popular, they serialize it in an animation form, and then possibly a movie. And so I feel like comic books have done that here, but there's not that animation gap. It goes straight from comic books to movies rather than animation. So I'm just very interested to see have this conversation with Ernest. Um, so Ernest, if you could just introduce yourself and talk about kind of where you started and how you got to where you are and some of the projects that you're working on.
So I graduated in '99 from a school called Cogswell College up in Silicon Valley. It's since been renamed to, I think, the University of Silicon Valley. I think they've dropped the Cogswell name. I went there specifically to study animation, specifically CG animation. So I was there for like a year and a half. In the summer of '99, I moved down to Southern California. As my character concentration teacher said, like, if you want to get into entertainment, you have to move to Hollywood because Hollywood is still a sexy word. Silicon Valley is not a sexy word to people. So I said, okay. So I moved down there, but I did have a job lined up. Very lucky. It's in my mind, I was probably waiting a long time after college to find a job, but I got one relatively quickly. But I was very lucky. So I was at a studio called Foundation Imaging for like a year and a half. Worked on like the Roughneck Trooper series, like Dan Dare, Max Steel. I was there for a year and a half, and then after that, I followed some coworkers to Nickelodeon, where Nickelodeon was getting into the CG world. So I was at Nickelodeon for I think a month short of 13 years actually. So I was there as an animator. I worked on Invader Zim. That's where I was brought into. I worked on Invader Zim. Then once we were part of a department that kind of was just under post. So we were supporting the shows as they came through editorial, so this is because Nickelodeon was trying to get into the 3D CG world where you could, if anyone watches like old school SpongeBob, like you'll see like the colors kind of vary. It's because, they're doing paint on cell. So, after a while, it's
The colors.
Technology, goes, everyone's starting to do digital stuff. So it could become a thing of like, oh, well, we want to fix this shot. Well, just have them send us the target files, layers. We'll just recomp it back here, put it back together in After Effects and adjust what we have to do. So we were kind of a department that supported that. I think Invader Zim was like our first digital show, and I was part of a department called Nick Digital because it was like digital. So that's why Invader Zim, we could do like all the screens and had 3D shapes, and the Zim was set up that way. So I was there as an animator. Over time, ebbs and ups, in production, ebbs and flows, shows come, shows go, sometimes there's walls in the studio. So after a while, the department I was in just kind of shrunk over time just because people, they just moved on to other things. They wanted to pursue other things. Some guys wanted to pursue like live action. I think one guy went to go work on like King Kong, everyone wanted to do other things. So I ended up being like, I was literally the last person in the department. So I kind of inherited it. And because it was like, well, Ernest knows where all the files are and he's still here, so I eventually was still an animator artist. And then as, shows come back in, it got to a thing where it's like, oh, well, I can't do this by myself anymore. Like I need help. So it's like, no, I was able to hire people and then went from being, well, if I'm going to do all this, like I should be a supervisor. And like, we agree. So that's why I went from being an artist, animator to a supervisor. I was like that for, a long time. And then in 2014, DreamWorks TV was starting up. There's an opportunity there. So I went from Nickelodeon to DreamWorks. I kind of did the same thing where I had this tiny little like ragtag group animators, generalists, that we could do all this random stuff. And then last year I was kind of promoted where we kind of saw like, well, we like what you do is it doesn't have to be so animation like centric, in that I would support a department we would do stuff that was outside a pipeline. Like if you had a CG show and they wanted like a 2D style sequence, kind of like what you saw in the Kung Fu Panda movies, like how it opens, like it's got that really awesome motion graphic comic book thing. Like we would do that for the series. So I had artists that could do that. But, my group and I was like getting into other animation, and just, my knowledge after I was like, well, you don't have a general supervisor for all DreamWorks TV. So that's where I am in now, right? I kind of oversee all of the animation needs of TV, where I oversee, the animation directors, supervisors on the shows as stuff is coming through development, because they won't have an animation team in place. I'll look at the style and set the expectations, so that's where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
So
obviously, movies have large budgets, and you see these amazing CGI that really people can't, they don't see how much work goes into rendering all the images they see on screen. Is TV also kind of improved in that sense? Are we seeing a lot more? Is it still expensive to have sort of movie style CG on TV shows now, or is that kind of like commonplace now?
Well, I mean, everything is going to be dependent on the talent that you have, and of course budgets. that's always going to be how it is. I would say for us in TV, especially DreamWorks, the standard of quality is expected to be very high. I know we've had tests early on when we were adapting existing IP that was coming out of feature into TV, and like we had to kind of reverse engineer stuff, and then we were not going to use, we couldn't use the feature pipeline when the pipeline is proprietary. It's way different. They're way set up. One thing about TV is that I don't know. They get to produce, you say 90 some odd minutes over X years. We're producing, 22 minutes on, every few months.
Mm-hmm.
Over 26, 52 episodes, whatever. So like we're actually, minutes wise, we're producing multiple movies, if you will, in a much shorter time frame. So part of that is, pipeline, it's like really getting everything in line, making sure everyone's on the same page. We script, storyboard process, there's certainly a very, we can't, movies can certainly be like, as they go through the story and editorial phase and be like, oh, this sequence isn't working, we're going to reboard it and like start over. Like we can't do that in TV. It's like, no, that ain't going to happen. Like, the train has left the station, so to speak. So in terms of quality, there's a lot of things like, technology it just grows, right? So as long as you have the people in place who know it and know how to use it. And part of this too is that with TV, you can think of it as that your box is smaller. So it's not to say there's restrictions there. You can't spend, when my team is doing those like After Effects style 2D sequences, we're generating them around in maybe a span of a month, whereas maybe the feature side gets a couple months because they really get to take that time. So it forces you to be much more strategic in what you want to do.
Yeah.
There's definitely, animation very time consuming. So, kind of like what you were talking about, like, comic books, there's an element of like, well, when you're reading a comic book, it's almost like, it's basically like storyboarding, there's key poses,
Right.
Captain America is going to stand a certain way because that looks like badass and it's communicating something. So it's not that different than animation. So you can really draw on that where it's like, what does this read? And firstly, you see an anime, their drawings are actually quite complicated. They're very detailed, but they rely on few drawings to tell what they want. So that certainly applies to animation.
Ernest, may I display your website? Is that okay? Or
Sure. It's been a while since it's been updated. It has a lot.
This is your personal website.
This is my personal website.
Portfolio.
This is your portfolio. Yeah, it has stuff I've done from my time when I was at Nickelodeon and now at DreamWorks. It hasn't been updated in a while, but yeah.
Awesome.
I've worked, SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, several Kung Fu Panda series spanning from my time at Nick and DreamWorks. I worked on Voltron, the legendary Defender series over at DreamWorks. That has a very anime sensibility.
What are some of the DreamWorks TV productions right now that maybe that you're focused on?
I always have to think about this question because I obviously know more than the public, so I always got to make sure I don't talk
Yeah,
about something that's
of course.
yeah. Let's see.
Or things in production, or things that are been released that you can talk about.
Well, I mean, we wrapped on, Fast and Furious, I think is, recently been wrapped up in terms of what seasons are out. So production wise, we wrapped a while ago. So that was, a really intense thing, because that was actually one of our first forays into working with Universal IP. DreamWorks is part of Comcast Universal. So Universal has a giant library that, say, oh yeah, we Fast and Furious. Yeah, we've heard of that. The Jurassic franchise. Oh yeah, we've heard of that. So we had direct Camp Cretaceous, Jurassic World. That's out. That's out. My department, that main title where you see the Universal logo and us going to the planet through the jungle and open up on that gate, that was actually done through my department. Gabby's Dollhouse is another show that, it's very popular. It's skews much more junior side, but it's very popular. The toys are very popular. I had to do my best to try to find those toys during Christmas. It was very hard. So, Boss Baby, just I think we recently had an episode that came out, which was an interactive one. That's something we also do, which seems to be kind of, which is probably very interesting, because, this idea of interactivity with episodes is like, it's like, for any of us familiar with like the old Choose Your Adventure books, it's like, well, we could do that. This is the X's you're looking at. That was a Nickelodeon series. This is actually really cool. Carlos Ramos. They're big on bold graphic shapes. It was actually quite challenging too, because they didn't want to have any holding lines on the cell. See, there's no stroke lines or ink lines. So making sure things read was always was always a challenge.
Yeah, Namanhyung, why don't you try looking for on YouTube for the DreamWorks Fast and Furious animated series?
Take this out of the screen for now.
Now, you've been in the industry at a very interesting time, because basically you've seen so many advancements they're constantly happening, of course, but you've seen so many advancements, especially with, I think, regard specifically to, all the tools that people have now to render images and create really just amazing animation. So in the past, a very time-consuming. It's still time-consuming, I would imagine.
Yeah. Cartoons are very time-consuming.
But what are the advancements that you've seen that you think have changed the industry for the better?
It's stuff that would be related to real time. I'm an old school Lightwave user. They had something called VPR, so you could turn your viewport to where it would render what you saw. Now that's kind of what we're seeing with Unreal Engine and Unity, where it's like the game space where it's like, well, what we call was it WYSIWYG? What you see is what you get. So stuff like that, and I think obviously, as technology grows with CPUs and GPUs, just speed. I always describe being able to see what you want there, because no more we're definitely getting away from hit and render and sit here and wait, my God, back in the days, it probably took hours for something to take, you sit here and wait hours, and then it comes back, I got to tweak this, So this idea that, stuff is happening in real time, it's that what you see is what you get. That's kind of, I would describe it now we can move at the speed of creativity. Oh, let's make this thing red. Make it red. Just make it red. You don't have to sit here and be like, well, it's okay. We no, you sure you want to do that? Because that's going to take, we got to kick this back to the farm. That's going to take, 45 minutes. So we'll come back when it's red, and you come back, red was a dumb idea. It should have been blue. It's like, okay, well, so this idea that you move at the speed of creativity, the thing about because animation is time consuming. It's slow, right? And this will really relate to anything. Anything that suddenly becomes difficult, you're not going to do it. You're going to cut corners. You're going to cut corners, and it may not be the best. You're cutting corners because you're like, well, I have to get to the destination as quickly as I can. So you can either cut corners because you're being smart about it and you're being strategic. Well, I have tricks. I can cut these. Or you just cut corners because we're not going to do that. We're going to cut, yeah, I get it. If we spend more time, we'll make this product better, but we just not going to do that. So you make a lesser product, right? Yeah. So being able to move at the speed of creativity, sometimes it's not about finding what you want. Sometimes it's about exploring and finding what you don't want. Oh yeah, we didn't like that thing being red. I was in a red mood, but oh God, that doesn't work. So sometimes it's discovering what you don't like will actually help you find what you do want. Mm-hmm. So being able to iterate faster And sometimes because we're also in this thing of story. Sometimes you do something like this is something's tweaking the story. Like well, let's try this. Is it the camera angle? Oh no, it's because we need to combine these two shots into one, or we need to insert a shot. We got to add a shot. So it's like, yeah, it's the idea.
There you go.
It's
Yeah.
the speed. So yeah, it's just Fast and Furious. It's very ambitious. Obviously you want to try to do your best to retain or get that spirit from the movie franchise, which is it's big. Going to cities. High tech. It's bold. Those cars are freaking awesome. It's got to have this like grit and kind of sexiness to it, where it's like you want to see those characters drop into sixth gear and peel out, and it was a very spy techy show. So it was a lot, you got to have that explosions and cool gadgets.
Those cars look amazing.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of detail that went into this was really pushing us because, and it just looks great too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is, look at those effects, so there was a lot that was put into this.
I mean,
yeah, this is high quality. Yeah.
I remember working with the 3D studio myself. Just to create a 5-second of video, it take days. So
yeah,
I imagine. Oh wow, this is just amazing stuff.
So what happened with
this IP also is in development for video games, or did it happen simultaneously?
I don't know about video games. I don't know where this specific title spinoff was in terms of video games. There might be. We don't really work with the video game side too much. We really more just like we just deal with the IP for the episodic stuff.
Okay, cool. So we spoke a little bit before the show started about manga, and I'm sure you have some kind of engagement or connection to Japanese animation or Japanese artists. Can you just, I'm sure a lot of our viewers aren't necessarily, versed in what manga is or what anime is, but if you could kind of just talk about its influence on, or its, I guess, shared influence with American animation, and talk about how the two vary.
Well, I mean, I guess me, I'm an American. I was born here, so you're very much more exposed to American media. So that goes all the way back to like Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, that type of animation. I think as someone who's a fan of animation, I think anyone who is should definitely be exposing themselves to different medium. Anime is certainly one of them, but that even goes to like European style animation. So in terms of anime, it usually has such a stark contrast to American stuff. American media is very family friendly, I guess you could say. And some certainly it's an anime that is like the Ghibli stuff is very family friendly, but then you have stuff like Ninja Scroll. It's like, oh, there's some serious ish going on in these things, right? Like for me, Satoshi Kon is probably my favorite director, because like Tokyo Godfathers, Perfect Blue. I'm not sure where this comes from, but it seems like the anime world. Yeah, sure, there's still family friends. My Neighbor the Yamadas and stuff like that. But they certainly maybe because it comes more with like graphic novel thing. And they're usually much more. They're actually not. I mean, I would say graphic novels and the manga is probably not that different. Say American comics. American comics is pretty. I mean, there's fights, there's people getting punched in the head and stuff like that. But, you don't see that really animated a whole lot on our side for whatever reason. But, an anime, like, oh, yeah, we're going to make a series about this. You're like, okay, that's cool. Let's do this. It's like, Akira. It's like, oh, okay. Whoa, this is intense, right? So I think being exposed to that is, and what's interesting about the anime stuff is, sometimes their stories are pretty serious, and I think I certainly, for me personally, I appreciated that, because Western animation, it's I mean, part of it is maybe because it's Disney was such a juggernaut, then that just shows like, well, this is what is popular and successful, so everyone's trying to kind of replicate that family friendly, happy ending and whatever. Okay, fine, that's fine. I actually grew up on Disney, and that's kind of what is actually one of the big influences why it shows this. But then when you kind of experience something in anime where you do get those like, oh, this is a story that I didn't expect, or like this is really deep. I think Satoshi Kon was was my favorite because actually when I saw the movie Perfect Blue, if anyone hasn't seen it, I recommend it. Just I am forewarning you, it's a very psychological thriller, and there's certainly some difficult scenes to watch. So it's making you as an audience member kind of go and experience something, I would say you probably don't really want to, I get it. We all go to movies to seek horror, thrillers and horrors because you want to get that scare, but you're definitely pushing yourself into a direction where you're like, well, it's not, most people want to, laugh and feel good, right? That's probably why, the cartoons we have are like that. We want to laugh. Like that's very easy. I would say, it's easy, and not again to have good stories that make people laugh. That's different. But I'm saying it's easy because that's what we probably are inclined to want to do. I want to go and feel good. I'm not going to sit here and like, I'm not. People are into it, but like, most people aren't like, oh yeah, I want to go like sit here and watch 2 hours every night and like get mentally tweaked by watching something like that. It was like when I watched Perfect Blue, I was like, oh my God, this is intense. It's very much like Grave of the Fireflies. Like,
oh, that's the saddest movie of all time.
It's beautiful, and it's a story where if you internalize, you're like, yeah, okay, I get why he's telling this story. But it makes you go on a journey where you're like, oh, okay, I'm not loving this, but I'm going to go on it. So I was always like, that's kind of actually what drew me to animation in general, is that, I've talked about this in my talks, like, we as audience members, as fans, we start to have this very visceral reaction to characters. Like people love Mickey Mouse. I mean, they love him. Mickey Mouse doesn't really exist. He's like lines on paper. There's no physical, like you can go see the big, the actor at whatever Disney World, but like that's not Mickey Mouse. That is what he's physical, and you can get the picture. But like, one, he's probably not even on model. Like Mickey Mouse is probably supposed to be like 3 feet tall, right? Like old school steam people, like so. But people have this visceral reaction to this, to consuming this, where they believe that's Mickey Mouse. Or you watch something. The movie Beauty and the Beast, Disney's Beauty and the Beast was like one that really made me like, oh, I think I want to get into this, because I remember like, maybe it's very like this perfect time when I was in my high school where like, you're like noticing girls. But I remember like seeing Belle's character, and she was so different than like the princess. So I'm like, oh man, like I hope I meet a girl who's as cool as that. She's beautiful, she's nerdy, she's sincere. Like, oh man, like so like she was like real to me, right? So people have this visceral, honest reaction to these characters. It's not like, Jack Sparrow. What's Johnny Depp? Like you could maybe be lucky to meet Johnny Depp, and you're like, oh my God, I met Jack Sparrow. But you'll never meet like Mickey Mouse. You'll never meet Bugs Bunny. You'll never meet Poe. Like, but people have this honest, like, deep connection. I've always been very. That's always struck me as like, well, wait, this is just a combination of like lines and color, and through the magic of animation, what an animator is able to do. Like they believe this character's real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Mickey Mouse is more real to me than Johnny Depp.
Yeah, so going back to the anime thing, like these stories that make you kind of feel something uncomfortable, or go in a direction that you like, that Western animation sometimes doesn't quite do as much. It's like, oh, this is powerful, Yeah. And of course, because anime is so much more different than say Western. I mean, sometimes they have stuff that's high drawing count, but like the fidelity in the drawings is so intense,
Yeah.
That that like what that's a very animation thing. Like, well, what is that pose or drawing? What is it communicating right then and there? There's not a lot of fluff.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you are adding that Asian influence into your work, or are you able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's conscious, but certainly when we do. A lot of our, the stylized 2D style or alt animation stuff we do, it's intended to actually be very limited animation. So it's a very anime thing, those long pans, hold on this thing a little bit longer, and then snap into that, it's a very animation timey thing. I think one thing I always do is when I'm usually noting animation or trying to look at something, there's always for me an element of like, well, what am I feeling when this thing happens? Does that make that character like, it can't just move, I always tell people, like, well, there's a difference between something moving and something animating.
Yeah.
Like, the ball can move from one side of the screen to the other. It's like, okay, it moved. Technically it's animation, I guess, but I don't know. Why did that move that way? Sometimes, I'm always big on like the quiet moments. you know, sometimes it doesn't always have to be like, you know, if you like watch you watch like Toy Stories, you know, the characters, there's sometimes we think animation, like, you know, it's like move, like Jim Carrey. And I'm like, you know, sometimes it's actually not that. Like you want those quiet moments, those internal moments, those reflective moments, which sometimes you get a lot of anime because, you know, they do rely on less drawings, sometimes less motion, you know, you know, they certainly sometimes a lot of dialogue, you know, sometimes anime is very dialogue driven, but, you know, sometimes there's those moments where you hit something, you're like, oh, okay. And it's actually quite subdued motion wise. Then you have those contrasts where like flying around and like kick ass action, but there's sometimes there's moments. It's always those quieter moments that are more impressive than like the broad things.
You sound like you're describing music too, by the way.
Sure. Yeah.
Similar.
You don't want a constant noise, right? You need that quiet moments to make the symphony work.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just contrast.
For me, as a sort of a lay fan, when I look at manga and I look at comic books, manga is oftentimes in black and white. It's not colored. It's just an ink panel. And you know, comic books are obviously have color. Nowadays they have all the the digital renderings, so they really just look beautiful on the page in terms of the coloring and the inking. In Japan, for some reason, they just kind of kept the same sort of newspaper quality paper and illustration. But I know that the illustrators there's just like a culture of the industry like spits out like quality artists and really nurtures the love of drawing and illustrating. And I that doesn't, I mean, it's here, but it's not as, I think, prominent as it is in Japan. Can you talk about what got you into drawing and what you were drawing as maybe a kid? And you mentioned the Disney content. I'm sure that developed later, but kind of, talk about your progression as an artist.
I mean, I'm probably like any other kid who's like loves drawing, you know. But I think I always describe it as, whenever I talk to people like why they want to do this, I'm like, so why do you want to do this? It's like, I love cartoons. I love doing this. I'm like, that doesn't mean you want to do it though. Like, I could talk to a 5-year-old, like, what do you love? I love cartoons. Like, okay, but what do you want to be? Like, oh, I want to be a fireman. It's like, okay. I mean, it's just different, right? Yeah. So in terms of me, I always enjoyed it. I am I guess the antithesis of the stereotypification. Like, don't ask me to do a bunch of calculus because I'm not good. I mean, that's not what I'm going to do, right? And I certainly skewed more as the artist wing. I think you just enjoy drawing, and then I think, as you kind of get exposed to more of it, like I certainly was gotten to the comic book thing in high school, and I tried to get into comic books, but I mean, I don't draw enough or well enough to be like as quick at that, and I think part of it is, I think anyone who enjoys drawing, it certainly is the expression of like, well, this is how I'm feeling right now, like during like high school, I think, I went through this crazy phase where I was like just super into like angel iconic, graphics and imagery, Dante's Inferno and Gustave Doré, and I was like, really, broad biblical drawings where it's like, oh man, this like, wing. Cool. So I went through a lot of that. I think I probably would skew to more drawing stuff that's more deeply emotional or personal to me. So, really, stuff like that versus like just goofy cartoons. Like I'm not drawing Pokemons or whatever, So I was always more into that, like striking poses that like it evoked, an emotional, like I was trying to convey this. So I don't necessarily know how that transitioned into, say, animation. Maybe it's because, I remember sitting with a friend in high school and we're talking about what we want to do. And I was like, well, I want to get into the entertainment industry because, like everyone wants to be entertained, right? So there's probably something there. Like it's like not that it's a reliable or safe job. It's probably stressful as hell, but I was like, I think that's what I want to do. Because that's what people want. People want to be entertained in some form or fashion, I certainly was always interested in animation. I think I probably thought, I think for me, animation was like, oh, that'd be a cool job to do. But like, it's probably different now, but for me back then, it was just always like, well, I know people do it, but I don't know how. Like, I don't know do you go to school for it? Like, how do the people become animators? So, I remember being in high school and like, you sit here with your guidance counselor and they're always like, so where are you going to apply? And what are you going to be major? I'm like, I don't know. I think I want to do this. And like, okay. And you go to their like library that has like the books of all the colleges and you're sitting there thumbing through their department programs. I'm like, I'm not seeing anything that relates to me. And you try to describe like, I don't know, maybe we'll do something computers or drawing. Oh, maybe so you graphic design. That sounds right because it's like, I don't know, graphics and design. But then you do some research, like, I don't want to design flyers. It's like that. I'm not sure that's what this is. But you try. Go to school, learn Illustrator and Photoshop, and you're like, this is cool. But I'm not. This isn't speaking to me in terms of like story and character, right? So. Drawing is certainly an outlet. And of course, it tries to get better, your figure drawing and just drawing or just to, emotionally release or just create stuff, so yeah, for me, it was a struggle actually to kind of connect that. Cause that's where I say, well, I like drawing. So maybe comic book, cause comic books also for you, it was like the 90s when it kind of really boomed. You had all your, your alternate covers and like Dark Horse was there and, Punisher Warzone was like being spun over Romita Jr. So I was like, oh man, this is like comic books is a thing. So I tried that. I didn't get it just wasn't good enough at it. Plus it just,
did you have a support from your family on that? I mean, did you have a support for your family on that?
Yeah. My family was always very like, I don't know, what do you want to do? If it makes you happy, go for it. We're never really not the, tiger mom family where it's like, why aren't you? Why aren't you being a doctor? I'm like, I don't know.
Jim Lee's parents.
Yeah. So
okay. That's nice.
Yeah. I guess with the drawing, if you're into say, liking animation, then you start seeing the connections. Like, oh well, you figure drawing, drawing poses and stuff like that, and
and so you kind of figured that out in high school, which led you to down that career path. Then,
well, I was definitely I want to be an animator, but like, I don't know how. I didn't know how to get it. I was going to the junior college, like and they had like the first like, oh, we have an intro to 3D animation thing. That's no. I knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't know where to go. Mm-hmm. I remember actually sitting in class, or one of the things I think I wrote, we had to like write our letter to ourselves or something like that. Like, and I was like, I want to be the first person to make a 3D animated movie. And then Toy Story came out. I'm like, oh, okay, never mind. That already happened, right? But I mean, I went to the library, looking at art books, and they had like, this is making me feel old, but they had their DVD VHS section where you can rent things, and like the Mind's Eye video was a series that I would always repeatedly check out. It was always cool, like all your dancing steel pots, and so to me, like, oh, this is cool. I also remember watching this, I think the short Stella and Luna, which is like a short thing, and it really it put story together with characters. I'm like, oh, like this is like a thing, like this could be a thing. But again, it was this idea, like you sit here and like, well, they're doing this at like MIT or CalArts on like these like crazy, like they're doing rendering tests, so it's very technical and it feels out of touch. Like it feels like, well, it's there, but it's not for me. It's not available to me, right? And I didn't know where. So I went to the junior college thing, and they had a career day where my school, Cogswell, came down, and they were in the lunchroom or whatever it was, and you're just going to walk around the tables trying to like just see things. And the guy had this tiny little like probably 13-inch TV, the old 4x3 TV, right? And it was playing all these commercials, and it had one of them was like those like toilet scrubber, like they're swirling around the toilet. And I was like, what is this? And he's like, oh, we'll teach you how to do that. I'm like, that? He's like, yeah, we have a 3D animation program. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it's like, well, we're down in Sunnyvale, which is like, I could carpool with my dad. I'm like, what? Like, this is in my backyard? Like, so I felt like, okay, the universe is finally giving me like the golden ticket.
Yeah.
Okay, here it is. Like, okay, we're gonna line everything up. Like, this is it. What you want, right? I'm like, yeah, this is it. So it was like I applied, I got in, and I was like, okay, we're doing this. And then for the next year and a half, I was like, this is it. I was all in. Like,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I do remember drawing stuff and saying, hey, I want to be a comic book artist, but I had no idea how to get there. Right.
Yeah.
You somehow ran into your thing, but I ran into something else. But it's interesting that how you found your golden key.
Yeah. It's very different. Yeah, but it's very different now. There's so many more resources. Like but back then it was like this weird like secret society of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
You think being Asian American helped you, or? At that time, or was it?
I would imagine being Asian American, there's a large amount of animators who are Asian come from the AAPI community, I would imagine, being
And
there in
that's
Southern California and your
Yeah, I
team
mean,
specifically.
yeah, when I was in college, there's a lot of Asians. Like, oh wow, a lot of Koreans, Vietnamese. I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. And then, yeah, I mean, I don't think being Asian really hurt or helped. It was just, yeah, I
Just who
don't think
you
it.
are. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just who you are. And then going down to going to the studios. I mean, there's actually a lot of Asian animators, and and even the design department. I've worked with even now today, I know I've worked a lot of art directors, storyboard artists, production people. Whenever we get to the next season of interns, it's like, oh, there's a lot of Asians. So, yeah.
I mentioned before manga and just that culture of promoting illustrators. Like, there are a lot of people who enjoy drawing, but when you get into those technical schools that teach manga art, teach anime, the industry, it's like they cookie cut this quality of illustrator, and you just have to kind of reach that caliber. So I know it exists in Asia, and I know a lot of Asian artists kind of model that caliber of quality. But you've been in both. You've kind of experienced both. Does that exist here in America as well, or is that where do people get that sort of learning curve? Is it in the technical schools, or is it just from working in the industry and learning as you go as a professional?
I would say yes to probably all of that. I think here, stateside, there's probably less of the, when you go to art school, they're not really telling you how you should draw or what you have to draw. I think it's more about honing what you already are, to get you production ready, No, I mean, of course, anyone who's getting this should always know, like, well, when you come to the studio, we're going to draw. We're going to tell you what to draw, though. I get it. You like drawing Gundams, but this is a show about pink bunnies, so you better not be drawing Gundams all day for us, right? Much like animation. It's like, I get it. You like drawing, super squashy, stretchy stuff, but we believe you're a good animator. The show's not super squashy, stretchy. It's a little more serious. So it's like there's So I think I think anyone who's going to school, you should use it as I've talked about this and other things too. It's like you should use the school environment to stress test you. Because when you graduate, it's like you go to a job. Like, okay, now it's a job. Like you got to produce. Like, we as an artist, sure, we're artists. We want to have that freedom, that creativity, and okay, give me a break, man. Don't tell me what to do. I got to find this drawing, or this design's not speaking. Like, okay, I get it, but that background design's due on Friday. Like, I got to see iterations of this, or I got to see.
Related to comic books as well, right?
Yeah,
you got to put out the panels to get the book out.
Use your school. I mean, it's they're not going to tell you how to draw a specific, maybe there may be classes like, okay, this is the Disney style, like these are the foundations of Disney style, like you can draw whatever personality character you want, but it's got to fit in this show, because it's not going to be any different when you come well, okay, we have a new store clerk character, but he's got to look like Bob's Burgers. Now you rolled out, so we have another store clerk character, but now it's a SpongeBob, so it's a fish. So it's like you gotta be a chameleon and adapt. So it's
would you say being able to copy is more of a value than actually just creating something like innovative and unique stylistically, but just being able to copy really well is probably more.
Yeah, being able to identify what is the style of this, really talk with the art team, director, character designer, because someone could eventually get to the point where it's like, okay, but now you're in charge of the show. You'll talk with the creator. Now chances are the creator is probably creative in some ways, but he'll tell you this is the style of my show. But see here, I need I need the weird family next door that's like blah blah blah. Okay, I get your style, but this is how I drew the dad because I think this is how you describe the character. So that's stuff like that. But yeah, it's working artist. The working part is actually quite important in that phrase, right? So
let me ask you this: you say you hire some people. Let's say you're hiring some young talent out there. How would you look? How would you look for a person that will fit your let's say your requirement.
Well,
How-
for my side, because I mean, we're not really in comic books, so it's not about
Right,
illustration, So I'm always having to look at someone who is an animator,
Right.
and usually, and of course, depending on the position, sometimes they have to be a generalist, like, okay, can you do some rigging? How are you used to servicing and effect stuff and compositing, so, but for me, I always definitely skew animation. I would just,
You're looking for technical skill then, basically.
no, it's actually less technical skills. I mean, that's the thing about the world we live in. There's as an artist, you have to be technically proficient too. It's just, they're not, the idea that you can just like old school, like, walking with your old giant leather portfolio, that giant, that bound thing where it's like got all your paper and your drawings and like, look at my drawings.
It's a
like,
USB
that's cool.
drive.
Yeah, now it's a USB drive. We're noticing, it's my Vimeo account, whatever. But there's an element where it's like, okay, but do you know Photoshop? Like, do you know Maya? Do you know Nuke? So for me, it's actually less technical. I'm actually looking for what is probably very, I should be able to see it in, because I skew animation, in, this is maybe my bias, but I mean, it's only because that's where I've been. But like animation to me is like that's more difficult. If you're showing me something, I gotta feel it, and it's always that very tough.
It's subjective then. It's going to be very subjective.
It is very subjective, where it's like, you could be like, I think my animation is awesome. And it could be, but maybe it's like, well, this doesn't fit our show. Or it's like, heaven forbid, I've had this where people show me something like, oh man, my animation's awesome. My animation's awesome. I'm like, this is dog shit. Because it's like, like you do realize you got like, your arm comes in and like it wiggles around. Cause like, why didn't you lock this knee down? Or like, why your feet are slipping, right? Like what's going on here? So and part of it is that, I get it. It's art is very personal, it's subjective, but like your idea of good shouldn't be so far off that like we can't even be in the same like room, right? And so that's where my bias is animation, and then part of it too is be like storytelling. You're like, okay, this is cute, little short. What story did you? What is the story, or what is the character doing? And because I also have to skew leaning, because our work is often so varied in terms of what we're doing. Our work is so varied in what we do because we might have a different problem from a show at a different time. Like they're truly like, oh well, this show needs this effects replaced. Like so, we got to come up with an idea of effects, or we got to fix the comp. So I definitely need someone who is able to do more than one thing because the work is not consistent. But it's always going to be about like, me looking at the eye. Like, what did you produce? Because again, it could be an animation where it's like there's no set, there's no servicing, there's no lighting. Okay, that's fine because I'm going to judge you on the animation. Like, don't show me a bunch of stuff where it's like, well, you did a bunch of stuff, but you didn't do any one thing good though. Then it's like it's the eye. Like, what did you creatively see? That's the greatest measure of how I evaluate it, because then I can be like, okay, we're on the same page. Like you have an eye of what is good. Based on what you produce there, based on limitations, you could be like, okay, well, I chose not to sit here and do a bunch of surfacing on my character because I'm not a servicer. So I'm not going to do that to distract from what I got to do. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Or maybe I'm not a great modeler, or I don't have the time to do a bunch of modeling, but I created this like house set that's like, okay, it's very stylized. You chose a direction to still tell me the story based on the limitations you have, and it's a conscious decision. So it's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. So, you mentioned animation and comic books. They're really kind of separated in terms of like you either go into one or you go into the other. Do you see them though the industry's kind of merging and melding and doing more like artists just doing different projects and everything like video games and animation, or is it too structured to like you got to choose one and you only got to do this specialized.
Getting more specialized.
Yeah, I mean, I would say maybe. I mean, I know people who do their own comics as their own personal thing. They tell their own stories. I have one of my animators actually I got commissioned to do her own graphic novel or something. So I don't know that this is necessarily well. You have to pick one or the other. Now, in terms of like, I mean, I know my animators. I mean, they work.
Sets, yeah.
I mean, they're doing like, that's their full-time job, right? So if
Yeah.
you were to moonlight as a comic book artist, I mean, like, I don't know that the comic book schedule is super like, oh yeah, we'll give, like, you can do this, like, after hours, like you probably got to spit pages out. Like, I don't know what, I don't know that works. Right. So, I mean, I think in terms of what could someone want to do? Well, yeah, you could certainly, like, my lead, I think he has his own little comic book 3-panel thing that he does, but he does it on the side. So it's not to say that creatively you can't do one or the other. But if you're talking like, well, can you have 2 full-time jobs with? I would probably say probably not if you want to have a social life. Like, oh my God, that's intense, buddy. Like, that's tough. So
it's time, because of the time consumption. So do you have any engagements or connections with comic book artists, for example, like, growing up, I'm sure Jim Lee maybe was on your radar, or Jim Lee,
McFarlane stuff was always like, when he popped, it was like, oh man, this is like way crazy. And he's got this crazy Spider-Man poses. And that was like really like, oh, like, really the posing was like, oh, like you could still see like as an animator, like, oh man, he's like, he's torquing that, he's probably ripping people. Like, I don't know that Peter Parker's hamstring can do that, but that looks cool, right? So, it's usually the big, like the Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee was like really like when he came out, like his stuff was like, oh, this guy's awesome, So Rob Romita, I was really into the Warzone series he did, for me, it was actually always about the weirder titles. Like I was big into Dark Horse when it came out. When Dark Horse came out, and it was so like, well, these aren't your, it doesn't always have to be a superhero. Like it was just like, this is so cool. Like, so for me, again, maybe it's kind of like that anime thing where you're getting stories that are like different. They're so different that they just broaden what storytelling could be. Is not life isn't always a Disney movie. So.
And do you see more so, in Japan, animation really covers every genre, whereas here it's sort of, people consider animation for like children's shows and stuff, not really adult content. But do you see that changing?
I think so. We definitely have series that are, I mean, we're always going to be very kid centric, but I mean, we made Voltron Legendary Defender. And I remember when I was watching, I'm like, this isn't really for kids. Like, this is a little more serious than I thought, and I know we've definitely tried to, be more, well, it's a good story, and it doesn't, there could be there could be, I think sometimes, it's tough because we say, oh, well, it has to be for kids. It's like we dumb it down for kids. Like kids are not dumb. Like they're emotionally, they can handle things if they're not dumb. Like, I don't know why we have to see here.
Traumatic or anything.
I mean, can handle. So I think sometimes we kind of really, we try to like lowest common denominator thing sometimes where it's like, okay, fine, but you definitely see it, whether it's, with Netflix, like Love, Death and Robots, there's definitely a lot more of that stuff that's way more, not, it wouldn't be say like adult theme, it's a little more mature, if you will. So I think there's definitely,
I mean, like I was thinking when they announced the live action series for Sandman. I was thinking Sandman, that's great. I think live action is good, but I would also think like the Sandman animated series would have been just as good, just because you could do so much more like artistically, like they did in the comic books. And so
it's really ironic that we think that cartoons are for kids, but when I'm looking at, like, for instance, Looney Tunes, those are made for adults.
There's a lot of like
Steamboat Willie wasn't a kid's cartoon. It was
Looney Tunes are for adults. All the innuendos they have.
They were adult things. So interesting. All right, well, we have to wrap up here. So Ernest, this was an amazing conversation, and really just, I think a lot of people learned. I definitely learned, the industry side from you, and the artist mindset in creating this content. So thank you for sharing. Do you want to just kind of promote anything that's on the docket that you think people should be aware of from DreamWorks? Anything that's coming up?
we still have a lot of shows coming out. New Crudes is on well, we call it New Crudes, but that's just because it's how we differentiate from the movie. But our Crude series is on, I think, Hulu and Peacock. If you've got young ones or into cats, Gabby's Dollhouse. We certainly have all of our other shows on there. Voltron Legendary Defender, I recommend as a show to watch.
I watched it. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's sick.
Really, really nice.
Yeah. Studio Mirrors is really, really fun to work with. Their After Effects projects are super complicated, though. I'm like, man, you guys are hardcore. But like, you see it, and I'm like, oh, that's super genius. But yeah, that's
you guys use a lot of After Effects, huh?
A lot of After Effects, a lot for that show. Yes. Camp Cretaceous, Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous. That's good. Fast and Furious. Boss Baby, if you know Boss Baby, stuff like that, but I'm also a former Nick person. So if you want to watch SpongeBob, you're more than welcome to watch SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents. So, but I guess, for anyone who's looking, you can always check our job site, the DreamWorks, you can Google DreamWorks careers. We're always looking for new talent. It's, animation, it's a good career. It's fun. It's a job, but I had an interesting experience when I was, where, sometimes you meet people and, you get the people like, oh, I love SpongeBob, blah, 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 and that's cool. But then you have some people where, like, sometimes this what you produce, your content, like sometimes it actually means something very deep and emotional to people. And you're like, oh, okay, well, thank you. Like, I didn't know that, so sometimes it just isn't just cartoons to people.
Well, yeah. I think everybody who connects with it as a child, you're going to have that connection through adulthood. So yeah. Thank you. All right, Ernest, thank you very much for being on the show. And again, comment below if you want to have any thoughts on DreamWorks and studio and animation. And again, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.